14 months. That's how long it had been since I signed the papers, handed back the keycard to the penthouse on Bloor Street, and walked out into a February that felt appropriate, gray, biting, the kind of cold that gets into your coat no matter how expensive it is. I'd chosen a one-bedroom in Leslieville. Ground floor, radiators that clanked every night at 2 a.m. A landlord named something I still couldn't pronounce correctly. It was perfect. It was mine. My daughter was 9 months old, and she'd never once been inside that penthouse. That was the part I still couldn't fully explain to people. Not to my mother, not to my one friend who actually knew the whole story. How do you tell someone that you left a man like Dominic Hartwell without sounding like you'd lost your mind? How do you explain that the marble countertops and the private elevator and the black card with no limit are exactly what makes a person disappear inside a marriage? Bit by bit, until you wake up one morning and you don't recognize the woman in the bathroom mirror. I'd recognized the signs too late. Or maybe right on time. I still wasn't sure. Dominic ran Hartwell Capital, which was the polished name everyone in Toronto finance recognized. What fewer people said out loud. What you understood only if you were close enough, if you'd sat across from the right dinners, if you'd watched the way certain men went quiet when his name came up. Was that Hartwell Capital was the clean front end of something considerably less clean. Not a rumor, not jealousy. I'd seen documents I was never supposed to see. I'd met men who didn't shake hands and didn't give last names. I'd once watched my husband end a phone call, sit down across from me at our dining room table, and eat his entire dinner without a word. And I'd known, in the way you know things you can't prove, that someone had just been made to disappear. I'd left when our daughter was 3 weeks old. I had a plan, a lawyer, a timeline, an account in my own name, that I'd been quietly building for 11 months before that. I wasn't reckless, I was methodical, and I was terrified every single day until the divorce was finalized. He didn't fight me. That was the part that surprised everyone and didn't surprise me at all. Dominic Hartwell didn't fight things he found beneath his dignity. I got what was fair, enough to start over, nothing that would give him a reason to keep looking at me. And I took our daughter, whose existence he had acknowledged with the same emotional weight he acknowledged quarterly earnings reports, and I moved us into our little Leslieville apartment with the clanking radiators, and I told myself we were going to be fine. Most days, I believed it. Rosie had just started pulling herself up on the furniture. She'd grab the edge of the coffee table with both fists and haul herself upright, shaking with the effort of it, and then look at me with this expression of absolute triumph that I couldn't have described to you without crying. She had his eyes. I'd made my peace with that. Dark brown, almost black, with these ridiculous lashes that I already knew were going to drive people insane when she was older. But she laughed like me, loud and a little too long, surprised by her own happiness. I chose to focus on that. It was a Wednesday evening in April when my phone rang. Not my regular number. The contact display showed a 416 number I didn't recognize, which I almost let go to voicemail. I'd been in the middle of Rosie's bath, one hand on her back, the other trying to reach the towel I'd left slightly too far away, and I almost ignored it entirely. Something made me answer. "Is this Ms. Caldwell?" "Yes." I switched the phone to speaker, got the towel, lifted Rosie out of the infant tub. "This is Dr. Ferreira calling from St. Michael's Hospital. I'm sorry to bother you at this hour. I'm working with the pediatric hematology team, and I'm reaching out regarding your daughter, Rosie." I stopped moving. "Rosie's right here. I'm holding her. What do you mean? What do you?" "I'm sorry, I should clarify. We're not calling about a current emergency. We're calling because we've been trying to locate her father for a medical history inquiry, and his last known contact information has led us back through records to you. His name is listed on the birth registration as Dominic Hartwell." The apartment was quiet except for Rosie making small sounds against my shoulder, one fist clenched in my hair. "Why?" I said slowly. "Does a pediatric hematology team need to contact Rosie's father, Dr. Ferreira?" Paused in a way that told me she was choosing her words. "There's a patient currently in our care who may share a significant genetic connection with your daughter. We're not able to discuss patient details, but in situations like this, where we're attempting to construct a complete family medical history for a child in urgent care, We often reach out to all possible related parties. Mr. Hartwell's records show your daughter as his only registered child. We were hoping to speak with him to understand his family's medical background, specifically around a rare blood disorder. I stood in my bathroom with my wet daughter wrapped in a duck towel and tried to process what I was hearing. What kind of blood disorder? I'm really not able to go into details about the other patient. What I can tell you is that if Mr. Hartwell has any known family history of clotting disorders, cardiac anomalies, or inherited metabolic conditions, that information could be genuinely time-sensitive for a child in our care right now. I was quiet for a long moment. I'll contact him, I said. I can't promise he'll call you, but I'll tell him. I hung up and sat down on the edge of the bathtub with Rosie in my lap and thought about the 14 months I'd spent building a life that didn't include Dominic Hartwell in any form. No texts, no emails. The only communication had been through our respective lawyers, and even that had tapered to nothing 6 months ago. I thought about the child in that hospital who needed information that only he could provide. I picked up my phone. He answered on the second ring, which I hadn't expected. It was nearly 8 in the evening. Lauren. His voice was exactly the same. I don't know what I'd imagined, that it would have changed somehow, gotten softer or harder or different enough that I'd feel nothing. It hadn't changed at all. I know this is unexpected, I said. I was using my most professional voice, the one I'd perfected in 11 years of corporate communications before I'd left my career for his world. Neutral, informative, detached. I received a call from St. Michael's Hospital tonight. Pediatric hematology. They're trying to reach you. A pause. For what reason? They have a child in urgent care who may be genetically related to Rosie. They need your family medical history. Specifically blood disorders, cardiac conditions, that kind of thing. The silence that followed was different from his usual silences. His usual silences were calculated, performative, weapons he'd use in negotiations. This one felt like something else. Like the air had gone out of him for just 1 second. Related to Rosie, he repeated. That's what they said. She's your only registered child, apparently, so they came looking for you through her birth certificate. I kept my voice even. I don't know anything about another child. That's not information they were able to share with me. I'm just passing on the message. What's the doctor's name? I gave it to him. I gave him the number. And then, because I was a person who believed in being thorough, I added, whatever is happening with that child, whether or not you know who they are, they're in a pediatric unit needing urgent information. I think you should call. I will. Another pause. How is she? I almost said who, but I knew he meant Rosie. He was watching her grab the edge of the coffee table in my mind, shaking with the effort of standing up. She's healthy, I said. She's good. Good. And he hung up. I put the phone face down on the bathroom counter and exhaled. I didn't hear anything for 2 days. I told myself that was fine. I had done what I was supposed to do. The rest wasn't mine to carry. On the third day, a Saturday morning, I was at the little cafe on Queen East that let me bring Rosie in the stroller, the one that made the oat milk latte I'd become embarrassingly reliant on, when my phone rang again. This time I recognized the number. I almost didn't answer. I genuinely considered just watching it ring. Yes, I said. I need to talk to you. Dominic's voice. In person. That's not. There's something I should have told you before I called the hospital. Something you need to know before this becomes more complicated than it already is. I looked at Rosie in her stroller, batting at the ring toy clipped to the handlebar, utterly unconcerned with the drama of adults. You have 20 minutes, I said. I'm at the cafe on Queen and Leslie. If you know what that is, come here. If you don't, we can reschedule for a time that's convenient for a lawyer to be present. He showed up in 12 minutes, which meant he'd already known where I was. I didn't examine that too closely. He looked the same. That was the infuriating thing. I'd changed in ways I could feel in my body. Less sleep, different muscle from carrying a baby everywhere, a kind of permanent alertness that parenthood installs in you without asking. He looked like 14 months had been nothing more than an extended business trip. Dark suit, no tie. The kind of effortlessness that costs enormous amounts of money to maintain. He sat down across from me and looked at Rosie for a long moment before he spoke. She's bigger, he said. That's what babies do. He looked up at me then. I have a son. I set down my coffee cup. He's 6 years old. His name is James. His mother was. We were together before you and I met. It ended badly. She moved to Montreal, and then she moved again, and by the time I found out she was pregnant, she'd made it very clear she wanted nothing from me, and would accept nothing. I had lawyers try. She refused contact, refused everything. He stopped. 11 months ago she died. A car accident on the Trans-Canada Highway outside of Winnipeg. James has been in foster care since then, while her family's estate was sorted. I stared at him. You have a 6-year-old son in foster care. No, not anymore. I've been going through the process. A lawyer, a social worker, the courts. He's been in temporary placement with a family in Mississauga while it's determined. I'm nearly through it. He paused. The hematology team called me because James presented at St. Michael's last week with symptoms they hadn't seen before. They're trying to determine whether it's hereditary. My family has a history of something called Factor V Leiden. It's a clotting disorder. Is he going to be okay? They believe so. They've put him on blood thinners. They think they caught it before any significant damage, but they needed to know my family history to confirm the diagnosis. That's why they were calling. I sat with that for a moment. A 6-year-old boy who'd lost his mother, was in a family placement in Mississauga, had apparently just been through a terrifying medical event, and was in the process of being claimed by a father who, whatever I believed about Dominic Hartwell, had apparently spent nearly a year trying to reach him through proper legal channels. Does Rosie need to be tested? I asked. For the Factor V. He nodded slowly. They recommended it, yes. It's a blood test. Straightforward. Since she's my biological daughter, there's a chance she carries it too. Most people with Factor V Leiden never develop symptoms, but it's better to know. I looked at my daughter. She'd gotten hold of the ring toy and was now attempting to eat it. I'll call her pediatrician Monday morning, I said. Give me the name of the doctor at St. Michael's, and whatever documentation you have about your family history. Of course. We sat in silence for a moment. Outside on Queen Street, someone was unloading a delivery van. A cyclist rang their bell at someone who hadn't checked their door. The ordinary Saturday sounds of the city continuing without any awareness of what was happening at this particular cafe table. You should have told me, I said. About James. When we were together, I know. That's not. I stopped. It's not just about the medical thing. You had a child out there. You had a son you were trying to reach, presumably, and you didn't tell me. I thought I knew the shape of your life. You knew the shape of the life I was able to show you. That's not good enough, Dominic. I know that too. I didn't know what to do with him in this register. Dominic Hartwell apologizing wasn't something I'd had to reckon with before. In 12 years of knowing him, 4 of them married. It sat wrong on him, like a jacket that didn't fit, and I didn't trust it entirely. But I also couldn't tell myself it wasn't real. How is he? I asked finally. James. Now that the acute thing is being managed. Something moved across his face that I hadn't expected. Something that might have been, in a lesser man, the precursor to tears. He shut it down immediately, because he was Dominic, but I'd seen it. He's scared, he said. He's 6 years old, and he's been in 3 different placements in 11 months, and he's scared. He likes dinosaurs. The social worker told me he asks for a specific book every night, the one about the T-Rex, who's afraid of the dark. He stopped. I bought him 12 copies. I didn't know which placement would have it. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure I had anything to say. He's going to come home, Dominic said. To me. To the house. It'll be different then. I'm going to make it different. I thought about whether I believed him. It was a complicated calculation, believing Dominic Hartwell. He was capable of enormous things in both directions. I'd watched him dismantle a competitor so efficiently that the man left Bay Street entirely and moved his family to another province. I'd also watched him negotiate a hospital donation that funded a neonatal ICU wing and never publicize it, never take a single photograph, never mention it at dinner. He was both of those things. He'd always been both of those things. That was what I'd never been able to make simple. I want to meet him, I said, and I surprised myself saying it. Not right away, not until things are settled, but eventually. Rosie is going to grow up knowing she has a brother. He looked at me for a long moment. You'd do that. She's a person, Dominic. She doesn't get to choose her family, but she gets to know them. All of them. He nodded slowly. There's something else. Of course there was. I've been contacted by someone on my legal team who flagged a problem. Someone who has been feeding information to a competitor. Specifically details about the custody proceedings, about James's location, about the foster placement. They've been trying to use it to create leverage against me. He paused. I found out 3 days ago that the source is my assistant, Caitlin, who has been with my office for 4 years. I absorbed this. Why are you telling me this? Because she knows you. She's contacted you twice in the past year, and you told me once that she was checking in. I want you to know to be careful. I don't want her to have any information about Rosie's whereabouts or schedule. I felt the cold move through me then. The specific cold I recognized from 4 years of marriage. The one that reminded me what world I'd been living in. She's been using information about a child in foster care as leverage. Yes, that's not just a firing. That's a criminal matter. My lawyers are handling it. Handle it through the police, Dominic. Whatever she did to you, she exposed the location of a scared 6-year-old in foster care to people who might want to use him to get to you. That's not a civil matter. He looked at me for a moment with an expression I recognized from the early years, before everything went complicated, the expression that meant I'd said something he hadn't let himself say. Yes, he said. You're right. I stood up, lifted Rosie from the stroller, settled her on my hip. She grabbed a fistful of my collar and looked at Dominic with the frank curiosity of a person who has no preconceptions. He looked at her with an expression that I didn't know what to do with. Not possession, not obligation, something more unguarded than either of those. The look of someone encountering something they hadn't protected themselves against. She has my eyes, he said. I'm aware. She looks at things the way I do, like she's already deciding. She's 9 months old. Still, I adjusted her on my hip. Send me the Factor V documentation. I'll get her tested. When James is settled and you think it's the right time, let me know, and we'll figure out how to do the meeting in a way that doesn't overwhelm him. I paused. And Dominic, the criminal matter. Follow through. I will. I mean it. I know you do. He stood. That was always one of the things. He stopped himself. Whatever the rest of that sentence was, he left it where it was. Thank you for calling me about the hospital. You didn't have to do that. There was a child who needed information, I said. It wasn't a complicated decision. I buckled Rosie back into the stroller, tucked the ring toy where she could reach it, and walked out of the cafe into the April morning. The streets were doing their Saturday thing. The farmers' market crowd heading toward Broadview. Dogs. Someone trying to parallel park a Subaru into a space that was definitely too small. The ordinary world, full of its ordinary complications. I walked home the long way, along the park, because Rosie liked the motion and I needed the air. The Factor V test came back 6 weeks later. Rosie was a carrier. No active disorder, the pediatrician explained. Most carriers live their whole lives without incident. But it was something to know, something to keep in mind for future, something to tell her own doctors as she grew. A small piece of information that lived quietly in her file. We were lucky. James moved into Dominic's house on a Thursday in June. I knew because Dominic texted me. Which was strange enough that I sat staring at my phone for a full minute before I read it. 2 sentences. He's home. Thank you for the push about the police matter. Caitlin was charged yesterday. I made myself tea and thought about a 6-year-old boy with, apparently, his father's dark eyes who liked dinosaurs in a book about a T-Rex afraid of the dark, falling asleep for the first time in a house that was going to be his. I hoped Dominic was reading to him. I believed, which surprised me, that he probably was. We met for the second time in September, at a park near the waterfront that was neutral enough to belong to nobody. James was taller than I'd imagined, serious-looking in the way of children who've had to grow up fast, with a small dinosaur figure in his jacket pocket that he showed Rosie within about 90 seconds of meeting her. Rosie grabbed it immediately and attempted to put it in her mouth. She does that with everything, I told him. My friend's baby sister does too, he said, with the authority of someone who has clearly thought about babies. They can't help it. Their brains tell them to. You're absolutely right, I said. He looked at me with those eyes. Dominic's eyes, and apparently Rosie's eyes. The Hartwell family eyes that skipped straight past whatever you'd prepared, and saw something you hadn't meant to show, and said, "She's my sister?" I glanced at Dominic. He was watching James with that same unguarded expression I'd seen in the cafe, the one he hadn't armored against. "Half-sister," I said. "But yes." James considered this with appropriate seriousness. Then he sat down on the grass next to Rosie, took the dinosaur very gently back from her, and replaced it with a yellow leaf that was apparently acceptable because she immediately tried to eat that instead. "She needs more toys," he told me. "I can give her some of my old ones. I'm too old for them now." "That would be really kind of you," I said. He nodded as though this was settled, the way children settle things that adults would have turned into something complicated. I looked at the two of them, my daughter in her corduroy overalls trying to eat a leaf, this serious-eyed boy who'd survived more in 6 years than most adults I knew, and felt something that took me a moment to name. Not the sadness I'd expected. Not the complicated thing around Dominic that lived in a room I kept locked. Something simpler and more immediate than either of those. These two were going to know each other. They were going to grow up with this afternoon in their memory somewhere, even if they couldn't articulate it. The first afternoon, the yellow leaf, the dinosaur, the park near the waterfront. I was glad I'd answered that phone call. I was glad I'd picked up without knowing what it would cost me. Glad I'd made the call to Dominic even when every quiet new piece of my Leslieville life said to leave it alone. Leave him alone. Leave the old world where it was. Some things pull you back, not because the past has claim on you, but because you're the only one with the information. The only one who can make the call, and the person waiting on the other end of it is 6 years old and scared and asking for a book about a T-Rex every single night. You answer. That's all. You answer, and then you see what comes next. Rosie finally got the leaf to her mouth. James made a small sound of absolute disgust. "Dad's," he said, looking up at Dominic. "She's eating leaves." Dominic crouched down beside them. This man who ran Hartwell Capital, who had rooms inside him I'd stopped trying to navigate, who had apparently bought 12 copies of a children's book, and said, with complete seriousness, "Rosie, that is not food." Rosie looked at him, then she ate the rest of the leaf. James covered his face with his hands. I laughed, too loud and a little too long, surprised by my own happiness. She got that from me.